Thanks, Colleen. I was neglectful in my role as chair to say a few words about format and procedure. That for today, what we're going to do is have, for the first panel, just to have each of our speakers make their presentation. And we're going to ask people to hold questions until after the break, and then we'll have a question and answer discussion at that stage. To remind people that the Q&A portion after the break will be under Chatham House rule, so no attribution. Also, a reminder as well that our presentation this morning is being webcast, so we do have an audience in cyberspace, which we have to acknowledge as well. And they will be able to participate in the question and answer session after the break as well. Then we have a lunch after our discussion at noon. Our second speaker is Jeffery Simpson, who is the Globe and Mail's national affairs columnist. He's been with the Globe since 1975 and began writing his national affairs column now more than 30 years ago in 1984. In addition to his work with the Globe, he's written numerous magazine articles and has spoken at dozens of major conferences here and abroad on a variety of domestic and international issues. He's been a guest speaker at leading global universities such as Oxford, Edinburgh, Harvard, Princeton, Brigham Young, Johns Hopkins, Maine, California, and many universities here in Canada. He's won the Arthur Kroger Award for Public Discourse in 2010, the Charles Lynch Award for Outstanding Coverage of National Affairs in 2006, and the Pollution Probe Award for Contributions to Environmental Leadership in 2011. Mr. Simpson has published 8 books, most notably in our context here, Hot Air, Meeting Canada's Climate Change Challenge, co-authored with Mark Jackard at Simon Fraser University, and Nick Rivers, who's now Canada Research Chair at the University of Ottawa. I've asked Mr. Simpson to give us some historical and political context around this evolving conversation between Ontario and Quebec around energy and climate change.
Thank you. Alors, bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Il me fait grand plaisir de vous voir et de vous adresser la parole en français parce qu'on est ici avec des invités du Québec qui sont, je présume, très à l'aise en anglais, comme vous le savez, comme vous êtes tous en français, je présume. I'm joking. I know enough about Ontario to know that that's a sick and bad joke. But il me fait plaisir de participer avec les professeurs à côté de moi, M. Pinault et Mousseau, parce qu'ils ont fait des contributions importantes au Québec, très importantes d'ailleurs, et même à l'échelle nationale. So it's a great pleasure that they're here in what they still call in certain parts, so you'll find this amusing, you from Toronto, in the Quebec media, they still call Toronto sometimes la ville reine. I want to start with an anecdote, a personal anecdote, which I don't usually do, but I think it's at least tangentially relevant to this matter at hand. In 2003, I don't remember whether it was in the very late spring or early summer, I was in Newfoundland, where I used to go frequently. And I was talking to people in the Newfoundland government about all kinds of things, including what they were going to do with their surplus hydro potential in Labrador. And those of you who know anything about Newfoundland know that whether the Newfoundlander is still on mother's milk or whether they're octogenarians, they believe that they were, and I'm going to use a word that I'm sorry will offend some of you, but it's a word that they use all the time. There's 2 words, actually. There's one that begins with F that I will not use, and another one, which is slightly less offensive, called screwed, and that's what they believe. So you can't enter any conversation in Newfoundland about hydro without a long lament and angry lament about what happened decades ago, and the fact that that saga is going to continue until 2041. I have some considerable sympathy, by the way, for the Newfoundland position, but that's another matter. At any rate, they were talking to me about the need they felt that Liberals were in power. Danny Williams hadn't arrived, to bring that hydro to market, possibly even through Quebec, which was really like dealing with the devil. Fine. Several months later, I'm working in my office in Ottawa, and the lights go out. What is this? This was the great blackout. So I got in touch with my elderly mother and with my wife, and I said, we're going to civilization. We're going to our cottage in Quebec, where they actually have power, and get away from this third world place where they don't have any power. So we went, and we stayed there for 2 days. We watched on television what was happening in the third world over here, which is very satisfying. And I said to myself in a moment of what I thought was deep insight, and therefore I put it in my column right away, I said, I have just been in Newfoundland where they have a big surplus of power, potential power. And I'm here in the province of Quebec, which has demonstrated over 50 years an amazing capacity to transmit power over long distances, almost unparalleled in the world capacity to do that. And I've just come from the third world where they have a blackout, where they have a serious energy problem, it would appear. Now, I know that the blackout was caused for a variety of important technical reasons and engineering reasons. I understand that. But Ontario kind of maxed out most of its hydro, major hydro, quite a long time ago. And it seemed to me that it was a natural fit. Here was a market. There was a transmission capacity that could extract rents from it. And the source was in Labrador. So I wrote that. And a few days later, I got a phone call from a gentleman I did not know in the Ontario Ministry of Energy who said, politely, he said something like, you know, we've read your column and you may think you invented this idea, but actually we've been working on this for a while. And sure enough, Quebec and Ontario, with SNC Lavalin, so we're talking about 2002, 3, 4, we're working up in a preliminary way a proposal which they then discussed with the then Liberal government of Newfoundland, which was receptive and interested. But onto the scene came Danny Williams, who was determined that Newfoundland should never be sold down the river again. And he campaigned successfully on no more sellouts, tapping into a very deep sense in Newfoundland that they'd been victimized, be it by the Europeans over fish, be it by the Avalon fish merchants, be it by the Canadian wolf after Confederation, or be it by Quebec in the hydro deal. This was a very powerful message, and he acted on it. Because he immediately scrapped the talks with that trio. He set up Nalcor, the Crown Corporation. He got a stake in the offshore oil for Newfoundland. And I went into his office one day, and he's not in politics anymore, so I can recount the story. I mean, it was a diatribe about Quebec. It was nasty, it was pejorative, it was full of swear words, including the two I've just mentioned. And it was clear that he wasn't going to do any trucker trade with Quebec, period. And that was the genesis of the beginning of the idea of basically trying to circumvent Quebec by building hydro capacity in Labrador, which would then be transported to the island of Newfoundland, and then by underwater cable to Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, and ultimately to the United States. The costs of that have skyrocketed. I don't know what the last one is, the last cost. And it's probably, but here I'm a little out of my depth, probably a long way from being a sure thing that markets in the States would be interested in taking that power with the availability of shale gas at a price point that's likely to be competitive, if not lower than the landing price of the hydro from Labrador in the northeast of the United States. Now, the Harper government, I'll come back to this in a moment, gave Newfoundland a promise of a $2 billion loan guarantee, which got up Hydro-Quebec's nose, but that's another tale. So at the moment, the great idea I had in 2003 of Labrador power arriving in Ontario is nowhere. But who knows? I mean, if the Labrador power ultimately can't be landed in the United States at a competitive price, and if the cost has skyrocketed, who knows? Maybe someday it will come back. There are lots of historical reasons, which many of you know more than I do, why Ontario and Quebec didn't become much deeper energy partners. Some of them are technical questions, which are certainly in the ministry report that's part of the reading materials. Quebec, a long time ago, made a decision to look south, which is frankly what all Canadian provinces with hydro surpluses have always done. And the Ontario nuclear decision was made a long time ago. And, of course, it has many strong supporters in the trade union movement and, of course, in the nuclear industry. Can-do, we should remember, was at the time a strong symbol of Canadian industrial know-how and capacity. And it was deemed to be a new technology that would certainly be competitive with other nuclear technologies around. Alas, as the decades have gone on, that has proven not to be the case. Because Can-do hasn't made a new sale of a reactor, well, somebody here will tell me when. It's been a long time. I was just in Argentina on vacation recently, but I got dragooned into giving a speech, and somebody said that there's still some discussions going on between Argentina and Canada about maybe another reactor, since the one they bought from us, or capacity they bought from us, has worked rather well, but, you know, we shall see. Vamos a ver. So we're now into refurbishing the existing Can-dos here and abroad. But the idea that this would be a model that Canada/Ontario could export to the world has not proven to be, unfortunately, correct. One might even say, in the international context, it's a dying technology. Not that it doesn't have, if you refurbish them, years of service available, but in terms of new markets, which was one of the intended ideas at the beginning, I don't think so. So the question one wants to ask, in part, is why would Ontario go through the very considerable cost to refurbish reactors that haven't found any recent favor anywhere else in the world? And of course, the people of Ontario, including myself, are very aware of what the costs have been, since you only have to look at your hydro bill to see the debt retirement charge to be reminded of all of that. And therefore, to be fearful, legitimately fearful, I think, of cost overruns and delays which have plagued these sorts of projects elsewhere. I want to say something about the federal government's non-role in all of these things. The federal government, over a long period of time, going back to when Newfoundland and Quebec first negotiated that deal, famous or infamous, and Joey Smallwood said to Lester Pearson, look, you have to intervene here to force Quebec, use your constitutional powers to force Quebec to let us move that power at a more reasonable price through Quebec. And Pearson said something like, if I did that, there'd be such hell to pay, and we were in a national unity challenge, as we seemed to always be in those days, and so he wasn't going to do it. And since then, federal governments of whatever political stripe have basically taken a pass on interprovincial energy questions. And that's very much the view of Mr. Harper at the moment, with the bracketed exception of the loan guarantee in Newfoundland. I personally think that a better strategy for the federal government would be to say, look, we respect your jurisdiction, okay, we're not going to get into a constitutional bun fight over this, but we stand ready to assist provinces that wish to create grids and create links. In Canada, Canadian Energy for Canadians is my free slogan I give to any political party. Doesn't mean we're intruding. It means we stand ready to assist financially if necessary with loan guarantees or direct contributions. We stand ready if there are technical matters that we can be of assistance with. We stand ready. These are works could be works, not only in the interests of individual provinces, and dare I say this, it's an American phrase, but works in the general interest of Canada. Now, how amazing would that be for a federal government to assume they have a role for works that are in the general interest of Canada? In the past, it didn't much matter, as I said, because provinces looked south all the time. It made economic sense, after all, and there was no federal incentive to consider works in the general interest of Canada. And so Manitoba went south, Quebec went south, etc. Today, because of the changes in the U.S. energy situation, it certainly isn't axiomatically the case, not just in hydro, but in other areas of energy too, that the Americans will take anything pretty much that we can ship them. That was an operating assumption, seems to me, for decades of provincial energy policies, and I don't think it's necessarily true anymore. It was also difficult, and here I don't mean to give offense to my Quebec friends, but sometimes it was very difficult for people, governments in the rest of the country, to deal with the province of Quebec. Hydro was a kind of empire within Quebec, and it was a symbol, a great provincial symbol. And as I said, it certainly is unloved in Newfoundland. And when Hydro-Quebec made a proposal to take over the debt and the operation of the hydro in New Brunswick, it was rebuffed very dramatically, including by the Acadian population, I might add. And it didn't have, therefore, very many friends, except intermittent ones in Ontario. It was also difficult, too, conceptually, because existentialism is part of Quebec's society. And so periodically the existentialism manifested itself in the election of the Parti Québécois. And the Parti Québécois, although business is supposed to be business and politics is supposed to be politics, it was harder for governments here to do business with a government in Quebec whose avowed intention was to break up the country. So yes, there'd be meetings between Lucien Bouchard and Mike Harris, as there were, and they'd put their arms around each other and they'd say, gee, Mike, you're great, Lucien. But, you know, au fond, the people in Ontario were reluctant to do business at a high level with a provincial government that was committed to breaking up the country. So that made it difficult. But now we have a strong federalist government in Quebec, a government that, among other things, has seen what I just said. It hasn't said it publicly, but I know for a fact they've seen that Quebec's relations with its partners, its contiguous partners, weren't very good and needed to be improved for a variety of reasons. And that includes the maritime provinces, Newfoundland, and certainly Ontario. And we have a new government in Ontario that seems to be quite committed to the French fact. I mean, I'm on the board of the Université d'Ottawa, and I know they're interested in the French fact. And they're very interested in cooperation and further cooperation with Quebec in a range of fronts. And they also know that they have localized objections in Ontario, whether the green energy people like it or not, to a lot of green power projects in the province. Just ask people on Wolfe Island how they like the windmills. Ask some of the folks down on Lake Huron how they like wind power. They lost a bunch of seats as a result of that. And both governments are committed to improving their respective carbon emissions record, although I have to say, whenever I hear governments talking about how they want to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, if they don't say, and I want to also put a price on carbon, I don't take them too seriously. I mean, there's lots of things you can do around the edges of the problem, but unless you're going to either join a carbon market, create one yourself, put a price on carbon, I don't consider the measures that they propose to be too serious. The last point, in Ontario, you can't really argue for hydro. It's interesting that the proponents don't do this, but you can't really argue for more hydro for greenhouse gas emissions if the energy you're going to replace is nuclear. Because you may not like nuclear for other reasons, but it's very good on greenhouse gas emissions because it's as clean as it gets from a GHG perspective. Disposing of waste and the possibility, however remote, of accidents, that's another matter. So this becomes more of a price argument, it seems to me, than anything else, unless you could clearly demonstrate that it was going to be there to replace the importation of natural gas. And I don't know what the debate will be at the end of the day, because, as I said, the power workers' union is very powerful in the province, no pun intended, and the nuclear industry is deeply entrenched with a long history. And I sense that the civil service, if I can judge from their reports, are quite wedded to the status quo, although they profess to be more open than that. Perhaps, in fairness to them, they're just being cautious and demanding due diligence. Thank you.